Hi there. We should be live now with everything going well. Okay, welcome to another live stream. I will say this is probably the only live stream I'm going to do in July. Never say never, but I'm going to San Diego's Comic-Con. So I don't know that I will be able to do a live stream while I'm in America. So, but I will see about doing a live stream the moment I'm back to discuss kind of what happened at San Diego and do a world building topic. Okay, so today we are talking about magic and the economy, which was the most voted for pick of the topics that I offered. Why is my light so weird? Let me just close my curtains. I have huge lights, I promise. I have no idea why they're being so dicey. Anyway, I hope you guys can see me okay. It is very hot. I understand that all of you are probably laughing at me, but it is currently 27 degrees Celsius in Finland, and I feel like I am positively dying. So forgive me if it looks a little bit like I'm too hot. Finns overheat in this kind of temperature. Okay, so let's talk about the economy and magic. So one of the biggest problems with the economy and magic is that people tend not to think about it at all. And one of the biggest sinners in this department is seriously Dungeons and Dragons. And it comes from the Forgotten Realms and from the difference between role playing and novels, right? In a role playing situation, you're not writing just the story. In a novel, you can say, okay, healing potions are uber rare and people don't have access to them easily. And people, and it's an expensive endeavor. And you can do that in a novel. But in a role-playing game, you end with the players buying magic potions by the bushel basket. And I think one of the books that illustrated this kind of dichotomy really well was actually Joel Rosenberg's books. The so these books are very interesting in that they're written as lit RPG before there was such a thing as lit RPG. Basically, the characters are transported into their D&D game. So with all their knowledge of that we have, they're transported into their D&D equivalent game. And at one point, one of the characters is trapped in a burning boat with a whole bushel basket full of healing potions. And he just downs all the healing potions and runs out through the burning boat, healing as he goes, as the fire burns at him. And that's the kind of thing that players can do. But if you don't think about the effect that magic has on your economy, this causes your economy to collapse under the weight of magic. So, if you look at the Forgotten Realms, it's a case study in a world that hasn't put thought behind the effect that magic has on its economy. So, magic items are supposed to be like super rare. Okay? That's the claim in the Forgotten Realms. But in every city, there's like mages who can make these items. In every village, there are mages who can offer these services. And in fact, that mages like push up their prices when they're dealing with adventurers. But even so, because of the way that the D&D system works, when characters are at level 12, they should have access to level 12 appropriate magic items, because otherwise the whole balancing system doesn't work. And because of that, they're then walking around with literal hundreds of thousands of gold pieces on them in order to buy these magic items. And the question for me is always like, why does everybody not just turn to being an adventurer if it is this lucrative? Like, the risks when you have healing potions so readily available, why is your whole economy not geared around looting dungeons? Especially because magic at that level, where you're literally creating food and water out of thin air, why do you have farmers? Like, literally, you do not need to have farmers. Everybody eat from the temples. In fact, if the temples, and this is often the case, right? In D&D, the temples can be it can feed the masses, okay? And the gods are dependent on how many people worship them. Just host food and water feasts every day. Like, your whole economy should be disrupted by magic as freely available as it is. And Bram raises the question that can't a standard villager be taken out by a house cat? Sure, but it's not. Because the problem is that it's just dependent on your class, right? The commoner class is such a weak class. But to take an adventurer class, there's literally no restriction. Anyone can spec into adventurer. That's kind of the way the D&D works. And yeah, Tinneras makes a good point. Maybe that's why you immediately are in the wilderness outside the cities. Maybe that is the case, and that nobody farms because magic has replaced them. But so that is one of my primary problems with D&D, is that lack of thought to what goes into the creation of economies and magic. And you can see it also in their in the items and crafting items. Like, mages would make a killing. Mages should be so rich in the Forgotten Realms, they should literally just be rolling in money with the crafting of magical items and the super high demand for them. So let's talk about and William Blower says, I kind of like the idea that adventurers have the lifespan of flies due to how often they die. It's part of the reason I like Goblin Slayer, that those poor guys get screwed over hard. Yes. So if adventurers died often, I would agree with you. But too often, the problem is that the adventuring party almost never dies at first level because you face a level appropriate dungeon. You know what I mean? Like, it becomes really hard to justify the cycle when you start writing in such a world, when you start writing lit RPG. So how do you prevent that kind of thing? So I think one of the first and most important things that you should think about when you're setting up your magical economy integrated with your magic is think about the impact that magic as a commodity has. Okay? If magic can replace your traditional labor, all right, then you have to think of it in terms of what happened to our world during the Industrial Revolution, as an example. Like, we have a whole movement, the Luddite movement was born during the Industrial Revolution because of the looms being replaced. Actually, that might have been before the Industrial Revolution, but the automation of the spinning created the whole Luddite movement that's come to stand for, like, preventing that kind of advance of technology. And Dylan makes a great point about, in Aragon, the Vorden's magicians make lace magically, and in a way it's faster than the traditional method. So it's how they fund the war against the empire. Traders and lace makers get really irritated by it. And absolutely, it is in the same way that we have this situation with the Luddites in our world. So you have to firstly think about the labor replacement value. Okay. And if you look at Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn, especially the later novels, not so much the initial novels, there it's very much a magocracy, but in the later novels of Mistborn, Brandon Sanderson very much leans into that, where mistings replace people's labor. There are people who, one or two mistings replace a whole team of people. And this, of course, causes unemployment, and it causes people to, protest against majors, and it causes societal change and unhappiness. So labor replacement's a big deal. Commodity trading is a huge deal. If your magic is funded by like a resource, that resource is going to be strongly traded the same as any other commodity, like metals in the world of Mistborn. Yeah. So their metals can even get depleted, and that can lead to economic downturns. And in the Stormlight archive, those gems that they store Stormlight in actually serve as currency for the world of the Stormlight archive. And Brandon Sanderson actually really does do a really good job of integrating his economy and his magic systems. He does seem to give a lot of thought to it. We'll talk a little bit later about the chromatic system, the breath system that he uses in Warbreaker as well, because that is also very well done with its integration. So it's well worth checking out his world building for how he integrates magic and the economy. But in Stormlight, people gather stormlight in these huge high storms using these gem hearts that they harvest from chasm fiends. So there's a whole industry of hunting chasm fiends and of gathering stormlight during the high storms. And there are storm wardens who determine, when a storm is coming so that the gems can be put out in to gather the storms. And the magical items that he uses, the fabriles and the span reeds and all of those kinds of artifacts, are all integrated into the economy, and they affect the economy in relevant ways. Like, you don't have messengers because you have span reeds, right? If you have frequent, reliable teleportation, why would you ever have caravans traveling across the countryside? If you have teleportation, if you have portals that are open between fixed points, why would you have bandits? Right? So you need to think of like these kinds of effects and how they would change the kind of base world. Let me just quickly check messages. Yeah, Kit makes a point about cloth being an extreme case because it's very labor intensive and commoners could only afford 1 or 2 sets of clothing. When I was doing my research into spinning and weaving and those kinds of things, I made those videos about those things that is on the channel. I learned that the amount of effort that goes into making cloth is enormous. Before the automation of spinning, women used to sit and spin literally continuously. They would sit in like in the Venice Square on the benches. There would be notices up saying you can't sit and spin here, because otherwise, like, women would just fill that whole square and just spin, because of the intense requirement of creating enough thread to be turned into clothing. And hence clothing was very, very, very expensive. We don't see it today because spinning is automated and weaving is automated and the creation of clothing is automated. So it's cheap today because of that automation. So if your magic can automate cloth creation, Boy, are you golden. Um, Kit says caravans are more fun than teleportation, transcontinental trains. Yes. So Eberron, which is a role-playing setting that I do actually enjoy, does a great job of this. They're like, yes, teleportation does exist, but it's not, you can't establish enough teleportation to like transport everything. So there are these flying ships that have got elementals sitting in the bubbles above them, and you have sky pirates chasing them. And I mean, that is just amazing. I love that. But let's talk a little bit about that chromatic breath that I spoke about from Brandon Sanderson's world. So, in the Warbreaker world, every person is born with one breath, okay? And they can willingly give that breath to somebody else, but it cannot be taken by force. So, those who accumulate a large number of breaths basically become increasingly powerful, and they form the upper class of society called the awakeners. Okay. Now, in this world, breath becomes a tradable commodity because they can be freely given. So, what happens is the poorest of the poor, in desperation, sell their breaths in order to eat. And they become seen as drabs, as poor people, as they can never recover from this. They are now down in the slums and their life is without breath, right? Without magic. And this obviously very starkly divides your society between those who can afford to buy breaths and accumulate breaths and those who have to sell their breaths. Because literally, the only way that a new breath is created is for somebody to be born and then to have to sell their breaths. And that kind of inequality you also need to think about in terms of majors and their abilities and the impact that they have in your society. Majors should be staggeringly rich if magic is not just something that everybody can do. Or they should be controlled by an entity that is staggeringly rich. It just it just doesn't make sense that people can, I don't know, create teleportation portals or make a ship run without the need for wind or create food and water, and they're somehow poor. It was one of the weirdest things to me in the Midkemia novels. Now, um, the way that Raymond Feist got around that was he said, well, they're lower path magicians, so their magic is not, as reliable or whatever. But honestly, their magic was pretty reliable, and it didn't entirely make sense to me ever that mages were so, downtrodden as they were in that world. Um, so I would definitely think about inequality in terms of majors and not majors. Uh, Dylan raises a point about in the Ruin Lord series by David Farland. Commoners sell their attributes such as brawn, wits, voice, etc., and this leaves some of them incapacitated, and they need to care like old people for the rest of their life. Yes, that's kind of exactly the situation that would arise. um, where it's the same kind of situation as with chromatic breath in the Warbreaker series by Brandon Sanderson. People would sell what makes them magical as long as they're still alive, as long as they're left alive by the end of it, in order to support their families. I mean, it is a fact that there was a time when parents would sell excess children to slavers in order to support the rest of their families. And it's not a race-based thing. It's something that everybody did at some point in our economic history. Um, because these are resource people in desperate straits take desperate actions, and that will obviously include their magic. So if they can sell what makes them magic and feed their child, they will make that decision, and they will do that, or they will sell the child's magical thing in order to support the rest of the family. um, it is also worth talking about crafting. So the thing with magical items is, if everybody can use a magical item once it's crafted, this means that everybody can access magic given that they can afford to buy it. So now it becomes a question of how expensive is it to craft a magical item. If it is cheap to craft a magical item, if it is, a small amount of money will purchase for you a magical item, then you will see people basically stack up on magical items. And and your mages will then make money with crafting. But like everything else, this is now going to come down to your commodity trading on what goes into crafting a magical item. Is there some kind of magical fairy dust that is required? Is there do you have to craft it out of mithril? Do you have to put a specific kind of magic into the thing? Being made out of vampire blood? Those are all then questions that you need to answer that will determine the scarcity or not scarcity related to your magical items and how people can use them. I do actually, on Tuesday, by the way, I am bringing out a video on on having the Industrial Revolution, but using magic as your power source for your Industrial Revolution. So check that out on Tuesday when that comes out. Also, you should think about your education and the impact that that has on both magic and on your economy. A lot of our research and development comes out of universities. If your magic allows for research and development, it is quite likely that majors band together in structures like universities, whether they call them that or not, in order to research additional magic. Those entities will then either make money by selling their inventions, which is also obviously an economic output, or they will have rich patrons for whom they invent. And you might very well end up in a industrialized situation where you have magic factories, where you have universities doing research into magic, and then you have that output going into a factory to churn out magical items or the commodity related to magic in a rapid fire manner. And that, of course, can lead to all the same kinds of problems as it does in our world. You could end up with government regulation being required in order to make these factories safe to work next to. I mean, your magic could have an output that is the equivalent of radioactive waste, or it could, create living areas that are not fun to live next to, or noise, or it could have color pollutants or whatever the case may be. The Evil Eye says, do you think fantasy economies could integrate some sci-fi contents in them, e.a. Uploading your mind, designing body, genetic, space travel? Yes. I do think that fantasy economies could absolutely integrate that kind of sci-fi elements. If you think of something like a lich, right? Where you have your soul caught in a bottle. If you replace that with mind, all right, and you say that your mind is in a bottle, and then instead of you living inside a rotten body or whatever the case may be, you create a homunculus, all right? And every time your mind is just popped back into this homunculus, if it's destroyed, you effectively have that mind uploading technology. It is simply that it is now magic that takes care of it instead of advanced science. I mean, honestly, advanced science that we don't have, obviously, I'm not talking about hard sci-fi here. I'm talking about the softer kind of sci-fi. The difference between that and a hard magic system is not very large. And yes, exactly as Kit says, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Who is to say that the Lich creation spell is not actually just a scientific activity, and it actually has nothing to do with, accessing the negative energy or being an evil mage or necromancy, etc. So yeah, I think if you just lean into the if you lean into the effects that you want from science fiction and just find a magic that works for you and achieves the same effect, that can work very well, and you can have those same kinds of economic outputs. I do think that it is worth also considering the effect that magic has on the environment. And this is one of the interesting things that Mercedes Lackey does very well. So, in her world, there were these two majors that had this massive war, and they actually turned huge portions of the land to glass with their battle of magical energy and so on. And this echoed through time forward and backward, and it actually resulted in magic being dispersed over the land, moving out of its ley lines and its rivers and so on. And what is interesting about that is that this then created a new requirement where the Telidris brothers went around the countryside and basically forced the magic to go back into streams and ley lines and nodes that worked for them, right? Now, they weren't bad people. Like, these guys were generally speaking good people who looked after the land and so on. But they basically forced the magic into pathways that worked for them and their lifestyle. So you need to think about what happens with magic, with the thing that powers magic. In Mercedes Lackey's world, the thing that powers magic is these flowing ley lines. So magic is widely dispersed, but it acts like water in that it will clump together, it'll form streams, and where multiple of the ley lines meet, they form nodes. And the higher a mage is, whether he's a master, etc., the more kind of bigger stream of magic he can access. So if you, as a magic heavy society, which the Teledras are, can create a setup where magic works in the streams and ley lines and node points that supports your lifestyle, well, you're sitting pretty, right? Everybody in the region, their economy will be dictated by your economy. It's not like it's not a case of like you will necessarily have complete economic control over the situation, but you will certainly have a great deal of influence over where any magic gets spent in that economy. Okay, do I have any major questions here? So Obviously, magic as a tradable item is also a big deal. Okay. So if you look at the Stormlight archive again, you actually have trade imbalances in the Stormlight archive, as people have like Stormlight infused spheres that they get because they hunt chasm fiends, they have the gem hearts, and then they trade them. And this can create a situation like in our world where one country is exporting all of the magic and everyone else is hyper dependent on them. And this can create a very, very, very powder keg kind of situation where unless that country can defend themselves, they will be a soccer ball that other nations will kick around, like trying to gain control of them. Unless the other nations come to some kind of mutually assured destruction standoff, and they're like, okay, nobody touch the island of creating unobtainium balls, because if one of us touch it, then everybody touches it, and then nobody has unobtainium because they blow up the whole island. So it is worth thinking about your your trade imbalances in a magical situation, especially if your magic is commodity heavy and that commodity is found in scarce places. So you have a commodity coming from one island that is the core source of your magic, or maybe it can only be worked in an island because like somebody knows the secret of it and they're not willing to sell the secret, and there's no way to get it. Of course, in such a case, you would invite industrial espionage to kind of gather that knowledge from working the magical element in order to create magical items and um, push forward with that. Smoke asks, do magic items wear out? It depends. So yeah, Kit says exactly. It's like the Taiwan situation. They make the high-end chips. Without those chips, a lot of our industries come to a standstill. Do not touch Taiwan. Like nobody disrupt the chip flow. Ugly things will happen, right? And that applies to everyone. It applies equally to all industries because we are all now so dependent on those chips. It is very well worth having an overview of international trade in our world and thinking about how technology influences trade in our world, and then replacing technology with magic in your world to think about how that trade imbalance will work. And then, of course, in terms of innovation, you can have, if your magic can be researched and improved, it is entirely likely that you will end up with special magical items being created that are innovative and that bring new things to the fore and that will have the same disruptive effects as what happens in our world. Look at what is happening even now with artificial intelligence. Like, people are afraid for their jobs. It's having an impact on creators. It's having an impact on everything, and we haven't yet even achieved general AI. It's still narrow AI. So think about your magic producing items like that disrupt your economy in the same way. Like, things that really disrupted our economy, things like the printing press, and the computer, a massive disruption. The internet, huge disruption. So if you have magical things that bring items like that, or that bring that kind of ability to the fore, you will have massive massive disruption of your economy caused by these magical innovations. I feel like I have chased a lot of rabbit holes on this live stream, but I see I have spoken for 30 minutes. Is there any questions I've missed? Doesn't look like it. Okay, guys. So our next portal, Kit says, write fantasy for escapism, end up studying history and current affairs. That is so true. That is so true. I have a new shirt, by the way, up in my Teespring store that has wrecked search history on it as a meme. It's really kind of cool. It's got like all kinds of questions, and then, that you have a wrecked search history because of world building. So check that out on my Teespring store. And otherwise, I will see you soon for another live stream. There will be a vote up, though I think that I will probably repeat the vote about the impact of magic on warrior cultures, because that ran a really close second to the economy. So thank you very much for tuning in to this live stream from Just in Time Worlds, and do exit through the gift shop on your way out. See you soon.